Crime, Wine, and Chaos contains adult language and graphic content. Listener discretion is advised.
We'll always remember you like a child, Chaos Kids. I'm Naomi.
Ooh, I'm Amber. This is Crime, Wine, and Chaos. When you were thinking, you were sitting so still that I thought you froze. It's like, wow, she's really...
It takes a lot of energy to think. And there's nothing left for the body to move when
I get that.
I'm
I get
in
that.
my brain. Hi, sister.
Hi, sister. Hi.
This is episode 200.
200. How is
Crime,
that
Wine,
real?
and Chaos. That is insane.
I know.
That's a lot of chaos.
And a lot of crime.
And just to be clear, I don't get credit for, 200 episodes. Amber gets all the credit for 200 episodes.
Well, you've been here for 100.
A little under. I mean, a little less than. I didn't, I haven't contributed a full 100 episodes personally.
Listen.
I have to go back and come it up. But I think I'm somewhere in the 90s for sure.
That's a lot of Amber. So my apologies. We'll start there.
Oh, stop it.
That's a lot of Amber.
You know you're one of my favorite people. Shush.
Thank
shush.
you.
But 200 is a big deal.
Yes. Here we are.
So Amber did, I don't know if you talked about this much on the podcast, but Amber and her partner, her man friend, Michael, went down a couple months ago to LA to a podcasting conference.
Mm-hmm.
And while they were there, in one of the sessions they were in, Michael distinctly remembers hearing somebody say at this session that most podcasts, 95+% of podcasts started, do not make it to 200 episodes.
Mm-mm.
Less than 5% or something make it over 200.
That is correct.
And here we are. Still chugging away.
That's
a
right.
Little podcast that could.
Right. Well, I mean, we are, we're doing so good. We are the little podcast that could. Oh my God.
Just keep going. Going.
God, most days I feel like the Amber that could not, but.
Oh, no. You do.
You know
every
what?
Day you do so good every day.
I'm really trying. Thank you.
Know.
Yeah, this is it's quite the accomplishment. Pats on the back.
Well, I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I'm proud of us.
I mean, fair. That's fine.
Okay.
I'm more proud of you than I am of me. I'm just proud of me for I just keep showing up. That's a big deal for me to do that, to just keep showing up. So
I know. Thank you for that. I appreciate you.
Well, I mean, you invited me here. I don't know what you were thinking. So, you get what you get.
Oh, man. You bring the chaos. That's what I get. Oh, my God. In all the ways. I love it so much. Wowzas. Oh, do you, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I just edited the episode where I had to leave the window open so that I didn't die. And I was like, oh, you can't hear that, right? Oh, you could totally hear it. You could totally hear it. I live on a busy road, and oftentimes we're recording kind of at the start of rush hour, and it's just there's just so today I'm just sweating. I'm just sweating in here.
It's so hot.
It's so fucking hot.
So I've been, the kids have been gone for a week now.
I know.
So I've had the apartment to myself for a week, and I have another week still to go. And so the last few days, the energy I had a month ago when I was doing the purging.
Mm-hmm.
Now that energy is being applied to cleaning.
Oh, good.
So we're talking the deep kind of clean. The kind of clean where you take everything off the top of the refrigerator and clean the top of the refrigerator. That kind of deep clean,
Mm-hmm. You're mopping the ceilings, aren't you?
I mean, not quite mopping the ceilings, but I'm going deep on the cleaning, just room by room, surface by surface. And so lots of deep cleaning going on. And there's been some, there has been some exiting to go up to the street to take things to the car, to put things in the garbage. And man, boy, it has been fucking hot out there.
Uh-huh. Well, is that your first
Yep.
going out? Oh, okay. That's your first going outside in how long?
I mean, look, you know what?
No
Did
judgment.
I mention the part where I have the apartment to myself? Like, why would
That's
I go
true.
anywhere?
That's true. That's true. Don't go anywhere. Yeah, don't go. I took the last 2 days off and I had to go somewhere today just to run a quick errand. And I was like, ugh.
Right?
So
You didn't want to leave. You didn't want to go anywhere. Your
Yeah.
house is your sanctuary and your
It's
kittens
true.
are there.
That's true. So I hear you. No judgment. I wish I could stay that long at one
I was
spot.
going to ask you what you're drinking, but I see you have a Celsius in your hand
I
today.
do. It's a tropical vibe. Celsius. Starfruit pineapple edition, it says.
It's your fault that I like those things now, you know.
I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just I don't need them in my life. They have 200 whatevers of fucking caffeine in them, so I shouldn't drink them.
Are you sure? You seem pretty low energy.
Do I?
No. No.
I have enough problems sleeping these days without adding to it by drinking caffeine at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm just going to go ahead and let the Chaos Kids know that Amber decided she was going to go Mama Jamma for episode 200. She has a crime for us today.
I do.
And she read a whole ass fucking book.
I read a whole ass fucking Anne Rule book.
A whole ass Anne Rule book. Oh, this is exciting. And just, you know, I mean, I've read some books for my stories before, but this time when Amber said that, I was like, oh, well, fucking bet. I mean, I'm not going to show up less prepared. So I also read a book for my story. So strap in, Chaos Kids, because this is going to be.
This is the academia edition. We're basically professors.
Basically.
Right. Are you ready for this?
I am so ready. Give it to me.
I also deviated from our norm, but I have a caveat. So we don't like to do high profile, but also we're from Seattle. So a lot of what might be a hometown to us is high profile to the rest of the world because we just breed that shit here. So I'm going to give you today the Green River Killer.
Oh, you know what's so funny about that? What were we doing? We recorded recently.
The Spokane.
You covered Spokane, and Gary Ridgway came up, and you were like, "We've talked about him before, haven't we?" And I was like, "Yeah, we've talked about him." She's like, "Well, we don't need to talk about him anymore."
Well, you know, and then it got me thinking. I want to talk about it. Here's the scoop, though, too, because I'm going to have to circle back maybe at a later episode because my former mother-in-law works at the prosecuting attorney's office and was there when he was apprehended. And she's got some inside scoops that she's supposed to be getting to me, which they haven't come to fruition yet. But
okay.
So that's okay. I read Anne Rule. She's also very good.
She is very good. I also watched something relatively recently where they were covering the Green River Killer. And I think Netflix did a documentary semi-recently within the last year or two. Or it feels like it was something like that. And I remember very distinctly Dave Reichert was all throughout that documentary.
He was a young detective at the time.
P.S. He's running for governor right now. Again.
Yes, he is.
But I remember thinking, like, I don't like Dave Reichert because I do not like his politics and ACAB, right? But I had this moment of humanization with him because I was watching this documentary about the Green River Killer and him talking about it, and he like teared up and stuff talking about it. Like he was very emotional about it, so it made him a little more human for me. So that was weird.
That was good. Well, okay. That was weird to feel human.
No.
God, shake it off, sister.
No, you know I feel human. I mean, for me to feel like a cop was human to me, like that's hard for me. You know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Sure. Okay,
anyway, I'm sorry. Let's get into it. This is going to be so long.
It's going to be so long. As an aside, so I was on the South End this weekend. And it's just always so weird to be reading something or watching something, and all these places are places that you're very, very familiar with. And it's just
Totally.
like, oops, spooky.
Yep.
Okay. So it's July 15th, 1982. And two young boys are riding their bikes together in Kent, Washington. They'd been riding for most of the day and they decided to head home. So they're riding over one of the many pedestrian bridges that cross over the Green River when they notice something caught in the water below. And the first thing one of the boys notices was what looked to be brand new white tennis shoes. So they stopped and got off their bikes to look over the bridge into the water, but they couldn't really see what they were looking at. So they go down to the bank and wade into the river.
Oh.
This boy, who is now a grown-ass man, is like still traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they wade all the way out to the object in the river. And at first they thought it was just a bag. But as one of the boys was going to grab whatever this thing was, his friend yelled for him to stop. And that is when they both saw that what they thought was a bag was actually a jacket over a head. And they could tell because they saw hair coming out from under the jacket.
Oh.
This guy says, I still can't do hair underwater to this day.
Oh, no.
No. The girl in the water was 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield. She had been strangled with her own pants and she had a broken arm. 1 month later, on August 15th, so exactly a month, 1982, 4 more bodies are found.
4 in one day? Oh, because they found a dumping ground.
23-year-old Deborah Bonner was discovered by an employee at a meatpacking company. Her body had drifted up onto a sandbar of the Green River. Then there was Marcia Chapman. She was 31 years old, along with 17-year-old Cynthia Hines. Both Marcia and Cynthia were found underwater, weighted down by rocks that had been shoved inside of them. And then 16-year-old Opal Mills was found on the banks. Opal wasn't covered in any way. She was just there. According to later confessions of Gary Ridgway, I hope that's not a
spoiler,
spoiler for anybody. As he was dragging Opal to the river, he saw a fisherman coming down the river who saw him. So he ran and hid and left Opal out in the open.
Oh.
The amount of almosts with this guy is so upsetting.
Decades.
Yeah. So all 5 women were found within 1 mile of each other. And very quickly, the Seattle area was referring to this as the Green River Killer. And interesting, these were the only victims that were found in the Green River.
Well, I mean, they were also the first ones. So the name was established.
The name was established, but these were the only ones that were there because, he had to move on, I guess. So Gary Ridgway claims that he was a very unhappy, angry kid. He had limited intellectual ability. He grew up in the SeaTac area. A kid named Bruce Rivard grew up next door to the Ridgway family, and he says that Gary had a reputation in the neighborhood for harming animals with his BB gun.
Shocked. I'm shocked by this information.
Yeah. Gary Ridgway said that he felt vulnerable as a child because of his lack of intellect, and so he found victims that were more vulnerable than him so that he could feel superior in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever watched his confessions?
No.
I
don't think so.
Weird. It is weird.
He has like zero affect, right?
Yeah, he's
like
so matter of fact.
Yeah.
But he's also very polite. One of the prosecuting attorneys had said they kept him in a secret location somewhere in the Kent Regional Justice Facility because his confession and like these field trips that he went on to show them where other bodies were was like an 18-month long process. And so he was in solitary in some spot over there, which is also where their office is. And so she was saying like, I just got used to seeing him every day. Like I'd walk in and be like, good morning, Gary.
Ew.
And he'd be like, good morning, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, you forget that like, if I was here by myself, he would rape me and kill me. Like he started to become so human because he was so polite and so just there.
I mean, politeness is overrated, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, I mean, politeness is a tool of white supremacy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's part of like, we maintain this facade of politeness while underneath is violence and all kinds of nasty shit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Okay. So now we're going to Giselle Lavorne. She was 17 years old. She was from California. She ran away from her family home and was exploring like who she was, like most teenagers do. She had no ties to the Seattle area, but moved to that area with her boyfriend. She started doing sex work to get by. And so a lot of what was said about her was like she likely didn't know anything about what was happening in the area, that sex work was dangerous at the time because she wasn't from here. She was just like, it was just a pit stop for her.
And as they had announced this serial killer, had they announced the victim profile as sex workers?
They had, yeah. Yeah. So she left the motel that she was staying at with her boyfriend one day and said she was going to go make some money, and she never came back. She was later found near the Des Moines Creek in a heavily wooded area. And this turned into a popular spot for him because it was like right next to SeaTac Airport, and like the planes landing and taking off right there, they were so low that it was like really fucking low, and it was so loud that nobody would hear somebody screaming. So, Giselle was found in late September of 1982. She was nude and badly decomposed. She had also been strangled. And even though she was not found near the Green River, the MO matched. And so she was linked to the Green River victims.
But like in the grand scheme of the area, it wasn't that far from the Green River because like SeaTac and Des Moines, they're all very close to Kent, and that's all like south of Seattle kind of runs. They all blend into each other down there.
They do. And it's not, actually, I should have looked up. I don't remember what year Bundy was apprehended, but it's very close to the area where he was doing this, like right after.
Right.
Which is just like, what the fuck?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these were also back then like way more underdeveloped than they are now. So there was a lot more wilderness and like forested areas and like there just wasn't the housing development and the business development that there is today at that time.
Right.
The greater Seattle area, like outside of Seattle, all of it was like that, was more like that.
Yeah, a lot of wooded areas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So King County reaches out to the FBI for a profile, and what they got was fairly generic. A white male. Yeah. Well, they didn't call us. 2-year-old me and 4-year-old you could have done a better job. Oh, God.
Yeah.
A white male in his mid to late 30s, likely a loner, possibly living with his mother, and it would be likely that this person would try to insert themselves into the investigation.
Randy!
Okay? Here we go. There's a weird local cab driver comes into the picture.
I have vague recollections of the cab driver.
Randy! Oh, God. Poor fucking Randy. We should see if there is a case out there that Randy actually is a part of. I want to cover that. Fucking this poor guy.
It's never going to get old.
It was Randy. Okay. Well, this wasn't Randy. This was Melvin Foster.
Okay.
And he had contacted the King County detectives to tell them that he knew all of the victims and he wanted to come in and provide information.
Mm-hmm.
The 43-year-old said that he had given rides to a few of the victims. This guy clearly loves the media attention. And in one interview, a reporter said, "Did you kill those women?" And he says, "No, but I wish I did." Then he says, "I wish I did know who did. I would put a stop to them." I'm like, that was a bad slip of the tongue there, Melvin. God. Use your words. I wish I did. Okay. This guy sucks.
Oh my God, Melvin.
Yeah. So initially, he loves the interviews. He loves speaking to the press until he becomes a suspect, and then he gets mad. I mean.
And he's like, I know this guy named Randy.
I know. Have you talked to Randy? Let me tell you. God. So he's put under 24-hour surveillance for 3 months. And during that time, 4 more women went missing. So He was clearly fucked and was probably doing something weird, but he wasn't the Green River Killer. Also, like, he said he painted himself as like, I give them free rides because it's not safe out there, but also like, according to the sex workers, they weren't free rides. Like he was,
right.
you know.
It was he was looking for an exchange of services.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, old timey barter. I get it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then in January of 1983, the body of 16-year-old Linda Rule was found. She had her hair set on fire.
Which was not part of the MO.
Nope. Also, I think it's weird. This has nothing to do with anything, but like, I don't want to give Gary Ridgway kudos, but I find it odd that he went uncaught for so long when he has such a low intellect.
Right.
Like, don't you think that's kind of weird?
We've talked about how police detectives become police detectives.
But I'm talking about like a low intellect. Like, okay.
I mean, a lot of serial killers have really low intellect and get away with it for a long time.
I just think it's kind of kooky. Okay, so from March to April of 1983, 6 more women are reported missing. And one of these was 18-year-old Maria Malver. She was picked up on Pack Highway, which most of them were. Her boyfriend at the time saw her get picked up and followed the pickup truck that she got into, but eventually the pickup truck got away from him and he loses them. And Maria never comes back. When she didn't come back, her dad and her boyfriend set out combing the area looking for that pickup truck, and they eventually find a truck that they believe was the one she got into, and that truck belonged to Gary Ridgway.
Oh.
So dad and the boyfriend... What? Mm-hmm, yeah.
I'm just, yep.
There's so many times.
That's why I'm saying, like, this isn't about, like, him being lucky. This isn't serendipity. This is the police didn't catch the guy.
I know. Okay, so I didn't put this in my notes, and this is much later, but there was one guy who got put on the task force. I think he was a patrol officer, and he was put on the task force, and nobody would listen to him, and he left the task force because he was so frustrated.
Yep.
That nobody would listen, that it was this Gary Ridgway guy.
See, this is the thing, right? There's just too much like not good. There's not good training for detectives. And there's so much fucking ego allowed in this hierarchical system that they employ for detective work. It's like the microcosm within a task force that reflects the macrocosm of like the jurisdiction shit that we talk about all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same shit. And it's
really
the same problem of like lack of cooperation, because the things that matter the most are not catching the person. It's who gets to take credit, who has the right, you know what I mean? Who's in charge and who has the best ideas and like who's, senior here and all that shit.
Know.
You know?
I know. I do know. Yeah. So they find the truck. It belongs to Gary Ridgway. They go and report their findings to the Des Moines PD, and a sergeant goes to Ridgway's home to speak to him, and Ridgway is outside doing yard work, and he spoke to the sergeant over the fence, and the sergeant was somebody that Gary knew because they had gone to school together, and he's able to convince the sergeant that he never picked up any sex worker. And the sergeant believes him, and the information never makes its way to King County PD, who is investigating the Green River Killer, because this was Des Moines PD. And it was like, okay, Gary, have a nice day. It was later learned that Maria was inside of his home at the time that the sergeant stopped by and spoke to him.
And do they learn their lessons through these processes? Do they ever fucking learn their lessons in this? It's like, are you going to do that again? Are you going to just let a guy tell you that he didn't and just believe him because he's like a, 30-something white guy with glasses, so he must be believable?
Mm-hmm. He's your old high school pal. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is that thing. It's like, sorry, I know this is going to be a long episode and I don't want to get too tangential, but this is that exact same thing of like when men don't believe that like one of their friends is like capable of being a rapist.
Mm-hmm.
right? And they don't
Mhm.
believe women because, well, that's my buddy. That's my buddy from high school. Like, or you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like, no, your buddy's a rapist.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
like, you need to like understand the reality that is really common actually. That
Yeah.
your buddy, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's similar. It's a similar thing.
Totally. Yeah. So back to Ridgway. Him, along with his two brothers, enlisted in the Navy. He was 19 at the time and dating his first wife, Claudia Barrows. In August of 1970, right before he was deployed to the Philippines, Gary and Claudia got married. And it was in the Philippines that Gary has his first encounter and experience with sex workers. This is where he also got chlamydia and gonorrhea. And according to him, this is why he ended up having hatred for sex workers. Because, okay, Gary. So that first marriage doesn't last. And in January of 1972, Claudia files for divorce. The following year, he marries his second wife, Macia Winslow. They're married for 7 years and had a son named Matthew. In May of 81, his second wife moved out and took Matthew, and Gary was mad. He did have weekend visitations with his son, but it was right after this separation that Gary said he started fantasizing about hurting sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear. He started fantasizing about murdering women because he hates women.
So Jim Bailey is one of Gary's coworkers, and he says that at work, Gary was probably his closest friend. They started at, I know. I mean,
no. This is like one of those things where you're like, later you're like, I need to reevaluate like my discernment skills.
What was the vetting process there, Jim?
Right?
But it's spooky because, again, not to throw any bones, but it is hard to wrap your head around this person that you knew in this one way and learning this.
Sure.
It's creepy. It's so creepy. I can only imagine. So they started at the same time and they trained together. They both worked for the Kenworth Truck Company doing custom hand spraying of trucks. And Jim says that Gary was a perfectionist in his work and that they got along really well and they would joke and laugh while they worked side by side.
Kenworth was a decent employer. I had my bestie when I was in elementary school. Her dad worked for Kenworth.
Was Gary there?
I mean, this was the 80s, probably.
Is her dad Jim?
I don't think so, but I don't know what her dad's name was. I don't know what her dad's name was. I only met him like once or twice because by the time we were friends, like her parents were already divorced and she lived with their mom. It was the Holmes.
Oh. So Carol Christensen met Gary shortly after her divorce. She was bartending and working hard to care for her daughter, Sarah. The two started dating, and one day while they were together and having intercourse, Carol had to get to work because she was scheduled a double shift that day, and so she encouraged Gary to speed it up. And this pissed him off, and he killed her.
Oh.
Later that evening, he took her body out to a wooded area in Maple Valley. So weirdly, in his confessions, like when he talks about Carol, he gets teary-eyed.
Okay.
He starts crying over weird things. And then he has a totally flat affect with other things.
Yeah, he's fucked up.
He's so fucked up. And when they're going, I just can't. When they're going on these field trips, like there's many times where he's like, because he's cuffed at the ankles and on the feet and trying to walk through the woods. And so they have to kind of help him. And he's like, oh, thank you so much. Can you put my jacket back up on my shoulder? Oh, thank you so much. That was kind of you. Just like so. And then he's like, okay, yeah. So the body's probably right over here. Gosh, thank you so much. Watch your step right there. Oh, it's just fucking weird. It's like so spooky, but I can see how people that knew him in his personal life were floored. I could see how that could happen, Oh, God. Anyway, May 8th, 1983, 21-year-old Carol Christensen's body is found. So this is the one that he was sort of dating, sort of. She is clothed. Her arms are crossed. She has a sausage on her hand. Next to her is a fish and a bottle of wine. And she has a Larry's Market paper bag over her head.
Larry's Market.
That place was bougie.
I know. Larry's Market was like the Whole Foods before there was a Whole Foods.
Totally. Like the original PCC or something. Yeah. They had like
Larry's.
a robust deli.
Yes. Larry's Market, man. There was one in fucking Totem Lake for a really long time.
I know. It was so good.
Sorry, I got totally sidetracked.
That's
when
not
you said
the
Larry's
point of that.
Market.
That was not like of all the facts that we should have collected out of that paragraph. That wasn't it.
You guys.
Larry's Market. Oh, that's a throwback. Okay.
But this is a weird like dump site because of all this positioning. There's clearly a bunch of symbolism going on here. A sausage. It's all so strange.
Yeah. She had been strangled, and that was the only similarity to the other Green River victims. So after Carol is found, she's added to the list, but kind of like question mark, because what's going on here?
Right.
Then detectives get notified of 7 more missing women, bringing the total of missing women to 23.
And they know that a chunk of them have got to be this guy. Not necessarily all of them.
It's so many. It's so fucking many.
Well, and also, here's the other thing I think about. Like, there's a serial killer. They've made an announcement that there's a serial killer. Like, there's also probably some opportunists in here.
No shit, right?
100%.
It's like looting during a riot. Like no one's going to see me. Like the city's on fire. Who's going to see me steal this thing?
Right.
Yeah, totally. So in August of 1983, more human remains are found. There are several that are just skeleton remains, and the medical examiners are unable to determine a cause of death. By the end of October 1983, police have recovered 13 bodies. All of the women who were sex workers, because not all of them were, but all of the ones that were, the commonality is that they were seen getting into a maroon truck off of Pacific Highway.
Oh, like the one that Gary Ridgway owns?
Right. One of the tactics that Ridgway used to gain the trust of the sex workers was to have his son's toys in his truck so that it gave them the impression that he was just like a safe family man.
I remember that.
Oh, it's chilling.
So gross. It's like one step away from like having a woman with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Like, what's their names?
Barbie and Ken.
Yes. God. Oh God. Yeah. So in November of 1983, 18-year-old Mary Meehan was found in a wooded area. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. I know. Then 16-year-old Kimmy Kai Pfizer was found in a wooded area in Auburn. So at this time, there's like marches in the street and the public is pushing back regarding the Green River killings. They're like, what the fuck are you guys doing? You suck. Nothing's being done. And it's at this time that the Green River Task Force is formed. And that's December of 1983. They finally made a task force.
But in the meantime, that officer at the Des Moines department just, quietly went on with his business and never told anyone that he talked to a guy named Gary who drove the truck that had already been identified.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
It's great.
From early February 1984 to the end of March 1984, there are 6 more remains of women found.
Jesus Christ.
There's so many.
There's so many.
There was somebody is called it, I don't know how you know it's the last remains, but the last remains of Gary Ridgway's victims found this year. And our cousin Jeremy's friend Parker works at a funeral home, and part of his job is to do body recovery. And so his company went out and recovered those remains. It's like so weird. He randomly sent me a text about Parker and the Green River. I'm like, I need to meet Parker. Tell me everything. Everything. Oh, okay. So by the end of 1984, the death count is at 28. King County purchased their first computer for $15,000 so that they could organize their tips and start a database because the information was becoming too much to keep track of manually. In early 1985, the killings had slowed down, and many believed that the Green River killer was either in prison, dead, or moved out of the area.
Maybe to Spokane.
And he purchased himself a white Corvette. Seriously, I could see why they thought that. But what had actually happened was that Gary met Judith Lynch.
Poor Judith.
Oh my God. I watched an interview of Judith. Yeah, it's awful. They met on Highway 99 at an event for parents without partners. I had an old coworker who, it was like online dating before online dating was a thing. You could join this group and they would hold like dances at churches and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like the precursor to speed dating.
Yep. Events and adventures.
Right.
So Gary was 36. Judith was 41. Judith told friends that she felt like she won the lottery. She moved into Gary's house and unbeknownst to her was sleeping in the bed where Gary had killed several women.
Yep.
No amount of, I don't even know what saging myself, showering and scrubbing until my skin bleeds, like no amount of anything could ever make me feel like I have washed that out of my soul. Yeah. So at this time, there's still several missing women and the task force is still in full swing. By June of 1985, the remains of 18-year-old Shirley Sherrill are found. She went missing in December of 1983 and was added to the potential Green River victim list. Then the remains of 23-year-old Denise Bush, who was last seen on the SeaTac Strip on October 8th, 1982. Then in December of 1985, the remains of 16-year-old Mary West. I know this is a lot. I'm sorry. Then in December of 1985, 2 more bodies are found, and the total is now 34.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Uh-huh. Yep. I know. Only the first 5, like I already said, were found in the Green River. The rest have all been found in wooded areas around the south end. 21-year-old Kimberly Nelson was last seen on Pack Highway in October 1983, and it wasn't until June of 1986 that her skeletal remains were found in a wooded area off of I-90.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. There was one person who remembered last seeing her alive, and that was Paige Miley. She said that she saw her get into a maroon truck with a white man. And this is not the first time that the task force had been tipped off about a maroon pickup truck. Paige is convinced that her friend was taken by the Green River killer, and so she agreed to sit down with a sketch artist. Then Rebecca Garday, who was a sex worker, comes forward and tells her story of escaping from a man that she said she was certain was going to kill her. She said that he had pinned her on the ground and was trying to strangle her, so she bit him, and she was able to get up and run.
Good job.
Fuck. So the task force starts to look at arrest records of men who had been charged with solicitation or of any kind of sexual assault that matched the composite sketch that Paige did with the artist. And they come across the arrest record and mugshot of Gary Ridgway.
I can't.
Yep. He had been charged with solicitation back in May of 1982, which was 2 months before the first victim was found. So detectives drew a photo lineup that included Gary Ridgway and brought in both Paige and Rebecca, the one that got away, and they each chose Gary Ridgway out of the lineup.
What?
Yep. So he's put under police surveillance, and they followed him many times down Pack Highway. He would go like under the speed limit, so it was obvious that he was watching women. Then in April of 1987, a search warrant is issued. They went to Judith's place of work to question her, and she's like, has no idea what's going on.
They're following him around in his maroon truck?
Yeah, but at this time he's married to Judith, so he hasn't done anything wrong. He's being a creeper on Pack Highway, but he's not doing anything.
Okay.
So they do a search warrant for his home and vehicle. DNA was not a thing at the time, but they do an extensive search of his house and car, and they had absolutely nothing. No, nothing. Several of the task members didn't believe that he was their guy in the first place, and Gary Ridgway is eliminated as a suspect. Except for the one guy who was adamant, and he was kind of being treated like he was a dumbass, so he just quit the task force because he was so frustrated. Judith is scared shitless, and she doesn't know what the fuck is happening, but when Gary is released from questioning, he told her that it was all just a mix-up, all is well, and they carried on with their life. Shortly after Judith and Gary, after this happened, they got married, And by 1990, the Green River Task Force is disbanded.
They have 30 plus bodies on their hands. An obvious serial killer on the loose. And they disband their task force without finding him.
Ran out of funding, other things coming up, et cetera, et cetera. So as it turns out, when they did this search warrant in 1987, they did collect a saliva sample from Gary Ridgway.
Okay.
They also were able to collect several samples from the victims, vaginal swabs that they did preserve. So in November of 2001, the samples were submitted to the database and it came back as a match to Gary Ridgway. 2001.
11 years later.
When this happened and was like, I think everybody in this area just thought like that is one that won't ever
we'll never
be solved.
know.
It was like the Golden State Killer for us.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just never know.
We'll never know. So 52-year-old Gary Ridgway is arrested while he is heading home for the day from the Kenworth Trucking Company, where he had worked for more than 30 years. Right in the same spot the whole time. And poor fucking Judith. I don't think that woman is okay or will ever be.
I mean, how could you be?
So he's initially charged with 4 murders because that's how many they had that they had his DNA on.
Right.
But the detectives believe that he could be responsible for 75 that they knew of, but they didn't have the evidence to charge him. So the DA makes a deal with him that they will take the death penalty off the table in exchange for all of the information that he can provide about the other murders. So they start by providing a stack of photos of each woman that they believe is killed with like a blank piece of paper stapled to it with instructions for him to write down if he recognizes them and anything that he remembers about their murder or interacting with them.
Or where they are.
He does this. After this, he then started going out with a large security team on field trips so that he could point out the areas of where bodies may be found. So the goal for King County detectives and prosecutors at this point was just to make sure that all of the women and young girls were able to be found and brought back to their families and laid to rest, right?
Right.
It was during this time that they learned that Ridgway would regularly return to the bodies of his victims and engage in necrophilia.
Fucking gross.
Mm-hmm. This was learned after he mentioned several times about returning to visit the bodies. And he also spoke about like when he did start to watch the news and bodies were being recovered, he felt like people were taking his stuff. After a few months of this, they were able to locate several more bodies. One of them was Marie Malver, who disappeared in 1983 at the age of 18. Her family had not touched her room since she went missing, and every year they baked her a birthday cake.
Oh my God.
I know. Her remains were found in a wooded area on a steep hill in Auburn. On December 18th, 2003, Gary Ridgway appeared in King County Superior Court for his sentencing. The courtroom was filled with family members of his victims. He ended up pleading guilty to 49 murders. He had confessed to more and said he believed that there were at least 70, but the prosecutors had enough evidence for 49. And there's still several women missing. And all of the victims' families had an opportunity to speak at his sentencing hearing. Like
Holy
one by
shit.
one, they got up and spoke. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was given 49 life sentences with no possibility of parole, and he is housed in the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla in restrictive housing, which is isolation in a single cell for his own protection.
Oh, sister.
Is the fucking Green River. The amount of times that he was on the list is so... That one poor detective that was a patrol officer at the time, he gets teary-eyed talking about it, and he has done the math of how many people were killed after that, and he's just like, he can't let it go. He's
I wouldn't either. I would be upset and angry and like righteously so forever.
Yep.
If I were him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Whew. So fucking brutal.
Sister! You read a whole book for that. Jesus. Whew.
Whoa, man. Mm-hmm.
That was, and I even cried a little at the end. You really took me on a roller coaster ride today on that one.
I'm really sorry. That was a long one.
No, don't be sorry. That was amazing.
Thank you, sister.
And ugh. I remember thinking, well, the Green River Killer can't get us because he's way down there. I remember thinking that. Like, we were far enough away. It was far enough away from us that it was like close, but not too close.
You know, I remember thinking that too until, do you remember when I had that weird job for several summers in a row where I sold cherries on the side of the road?
I loved it when you sold cherries. We had cherries every summer.
Michael's daughter just knew me as like the cherry girl. Anyway, as I moved up in ranks in the sitting on the side of the road cherry girl, I would regularly go very early in the morning down to that area with my boss to pick up the actual supply from the farmers. And I remember being at a farm along the Green River and feeling spooked. Like, this was like mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
And just the idea, like, because I was a teenager, like I hadn't actually been in that area. Because same, like I thought, oh, we're safe up here. But just the idea that like he was never caught and now I'm like in his area was creepy.
His dumping grounds.
Similar to being in Spokane during Robert Yates.
Right.
Just eerie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sister, good job. Thank
you. Thank you. Is your chaos a palate cleanser?
Kind of.
Okay.
I have a chaos story for you. I have been actually sitting on this for like a long time. This has been on my list for a long time.
Ooh, I'm excited.
And the reason why I hadn't done it yet is because I needed to read the book.
Sure.
And so then when you were like, I'm reading a whole I'm wearing everything you own. I'm reading a whole book to really bring it for episode 200. I was like, okay, now's the time. So I'm going to tell you about Pauline Dakin.
Okay.
And her story. So Pauline was born in 1965 in Vancouver, BC, to parents Warren and Ruth. And she had a younger brother, Ted. He was about 2 years younger than Pauline. Warren and Ruth had met on a Vancouver to Toronto flight. Ruth was a stewardess with TransCanada Airlines based in Vancouver. Warren was an investment dealer and director with a securities company and had regular meetings in Toronto. Warren was a guy on the rise. He was tall and charming with a ready smile. He was well known in the best restaurants in Vancouver, a member of the Vancouver Club and the Capilano Golf Club. He spent freely, entertained frequently, and many have described him as a generous host. So to Ruth, who was 15 years his junior and having escaped a hard Scrabble life on the prairie, he was an impossibly suave man of the world and presented as incredibly good prospects for a woman with such humble beginnings. Pauline was 5 when her parents split up. Her dad was an alcoholic, and she knew that there had been some violence in the home when she was small, though her mom, Ruth, never really talked about it. She remembers being whisked to the basement playroom on weekend mornings to eat breakfast there so as not to wake up Dad. He was sleeping it off upstairs and was volatile when he was hungover.
Oh my God, that sounds so stressful.
Mm-hmm. This was Warren's second family. He had 2 other children, Pauline and Ted's half-siblings, Linda and Tom. Pauline had the impression that their mother, Linda and Tom's mom, was wealthy. She remembers how she often heard that Linda and Tom's mom owned the first ski resort in Whistler.
Jeez.
Mm-hmm. Linda was a teenager when Pauline was a baby, and she and Ted spent very little time over the years with Linda and Tom. So they didn't really know their step-siblings very well. According to court documents, the separation agreement between Warren and Ruth awarded Ruth $800 a month in spousal and child support, quote, on the condition that, and so long as, the wife shall continue to live a chaste life.
What year is this?
Well, let's see. Early 70s.
Okay. Oh, well,
Pauline was born in 65, and she was 5 years old when her parents split, so that would have been 1970.
That doesn't seem like very much for 2 kids from a very wealthy man, but okay.
But in 1970?
Yeah, but maybe. Yeah. Okay.
She got the house and the furniture. He got his family heirlooms. The court also gave reasonable access to Pauline and Ted for Warren, including alternate Christmas and Easter holidays and the month of July every year.
Okay.
Despite this kids never spent much time with their dad when they were young. He often failed to show up with the excuse that he had the flu. And when they did spend time with him, he was mostly drunk on the couch watching golf, leaving them unattended. Ruth once arrived to drag them out of the pool and leave early when she had called and no one answered, knowing full well Warren was probably passed out and not actually watching their small children.
Oh my God, little kids in the pool while he's drunk. That's fucking scary.
Right. Pauline, Ted, and Ruth moved out of the house that they had shared with Warren in a fancy neighborhood in North Vancouver to a slightly less fancy, more middle-class neighborhood, still in North Vancouver. They lived there while Pauline was in grades 2 and 3. Then they moved again, still in North Vancouver. It was around this time that Ruth introduced Pauline and Ted to Reverend Stan Sears. He was in his later 40s, medium height, wiry build, dark hair with a lot of streaks of gray. Pauline describes his eyes as a brilliant blue, his nose pulled slightly to one side, and a deep scar that traveled down one cheek and across his neck that she would later learn was a result of a tobogganing accident when he was a child.
Whoa.
He had almost bled to death. Stan was always quick to smile and liked to laugh. Stan was the reverend at the United Church where Ruth had decided her and the kids would be attending church. They went every Sunday. Years later, Pauline would learn that her mom had known Stan for quite some time before she introduced him to her kids. She had been attending Al-Anon meetings in the months before she split with Warren. And a friend there, recognizing that Ruth was really struggling, had recommended Reverend Sears for counseling. Stan was a psychologist and did a lot of counseling work along with his ministry. Ruth was losing weight, struggling with depression, and clearly suffering from years of abuse from Warren, emotional and psychological, and sometimes physical. At some point, Ruth started working at the church as the secretary. Stan started coming around a lot. Pauline grew quite fond of him, and he seemed to take both her and her brother under his wing. They often went camping with Stan and his wife, Sybil, who had an old camper. Their 2 sons were already grown and didn't join them on these camping trips. Ruth rented a trailer until she very quickly decided to trade her station wagon in for a VW camper with a pop-up tent on top.
Good for her. Also, it just now occurred to me when you said Stan and his wife. Ruth and Stan aren't dating then.
No.
Oh, I thought she was introducing him as like her new man.
No.
Just Reverend Counselor.
And becoming, him and his wife becoming really good friend, right? So during this time, Ruth was fighting in court with Warren over his visitation with the kids. And on the vibe in the house, she was fighting with Warren over his visitation with the kids. And the vibe in the house started to shift to one of like family privacy. Ted and Pauline couldn't tell anyone about normal family activities or even the most innocuous details about their daily lives. And there were the times that a phone call would send the whole family packing and hiking into a remote mountain cabin at a moment's notice.
Okay.
With Stan, oftentimes with Stan and Sybil.
Weird.
Yeah, weird. One time, Pauline came home to find Ruth emptying out the fridge, throwing bottles, jars, and other containers of food into a trash bag. She told Pauline that all the food had gone bad, but it seemed odd even to a 9-year-old. Does mustard go bad?
Yeah.
Weird. And then there was just the fact that more than once, Ruth packed up the kids and the house and left everything and everyone they knew behind without explanation. The first time was the summer of 1974 when Pauline was 9. Ruth, Pauline, and Ted headed off for a big summer camping trip with Stan and Sybil all over Canada. Ruth and the kids in the VW camper van and Stan and Sybil in their old camper on the back of their old truck. They traveled through British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and into Manitoba over the following weeks. At their last stop, Ruth told Pauline and Ted that Stan had a new job at a new church in Winnipeg and that he and Sybil would be moving there. And then she told them that they also were not going to be going back to Vancouver. They would be staying in Winnipeg as well. When asked why, Ruth gave some unsatisfying answer that really only left Pauline with the impression that it had something to do with their dad, and that Ruth decided that they all just needed distance from him and his drinking and the ongoing legal battles over the custody.
Mm-hmm.
In Winnipeg, the surprise holidays, weekend camping trips, and days off from school that had started back in Vancouver, they were also happening in Winnipeg too. They would just wake up one day. You're not going to school. We're going to go spend the day over here instead, or pack it up. We're going away for the weekend with Stan and Sybil. We're going camping, even though it hadn't been planned. And through all of this, they are still very tight with Stan and Sybil now that they all live in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
A couple years later, they moved again. Pauline was in grade 8. She's 13 now. She had made friends. She'd been elected vice president of her class. She was really, finally used to the fact that she wasn't living in Vancouver anymore and feeling good. And Ruth gave the kids a couple months heads up this time that they would be moving away from Winnipeg, but they weren't allowed to tell anyone.
This is like they're running from the law, or they're running from... This is weird. Okay.
So Ruth put the house up for sale, but if anyone asked, they were just moving to another house in Winnipeg.
Okay.
In actuality, they were moving even further east, all the way to the coast, to a small city in New Brunswick called St. John. Stan and Sybil moved there a few months before them. And even though Pauline loved Stan and Sybil, she didn't understand why Ruth would move them again where Stan and Ruth had moved. Their last night in Winnipeg was Halloween. The one-story bungalow that Ruth bought for them to live in St. John would be the longest place they ever lived. 8 years, that would be their home. And while in that regard, it was a pretty stable period, this was also the hardest time for Pauline as she had moved into high school and started to do very cliche teenage bullshit, right? Hanging out with the smokers and the stoners and such. And she started to develop depression and anxiety. And all the while, Stan was always there. It was pretty normal for Pauline to come home and find Ruth and Stan in the living room in the matching beige lounge chairs, Ruth's eyes red, cheeks tear-stained, Stan comforting her. Ruth's undefined sorrow that Pauline did not know the details of, often reading what looked like letters. The living room was fraught with some unseen, unknown worry or threat. Something bad was happening, but they wouldn't tell Pauline about it. And
Is this regularly or just this one time?
No, this happens regularly.
She's
Often
reading letters.
enough.
She's got Stan over there. She's crying. Okay. This is all very cryptic. Okay.
I mean, Stan was there a lot. He often would leave, the church for the day and stop in and have a cup of tea on his way home, that kind of thing. And again, they're still doing their camping trips and weekend things and, drop everything and go do a thing with Stan and Sybil. All of that's still going on.
Okay.
So Pauline finally got the courage to ask what was going on. And Ruth said, "Honey, someday I will tell you, but when you're older, I promise." So Ruth started working for Stan again at his new church. She was running their food bank. And then the church opened an adult daycare that Ruth ran. Pauline graduated high school and started working and taking a couple college classes at night. And then she decided to roll in university full time. Ruth was also taking college classes and realized that she had a calling to work in the church as a minister. So part of the glue with Stan and Sybil and Ruth was their shared religious beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their deep faith and commitment. And Pauline talks a lot about how Stan and her mom both were just very committed to helping people, really doing the thing that the Bible says about faith without works is dead, right? If you're not helping people and doing God's work, then what are you even doing with your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is when Ruth sold the house in St. John and she moved about an hour away to attend the same university that Ted was attending at the time in Fredericton. After that, she would move to Halifax to go to the Atlantic School of Theology so she could become a minister.
Mm-hmm.
Ted would move back to Vancouver to live with their dad, Warren, and his girlfriend, Thora. Warren had this lady that he had a new girlfriend and he was with for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth objected to this move. And anytime that Pauline mentioned how well Ted was doing or any news of his life on the West Coast, Ruth's unhappiness was palpable.
Okay.
She was not okay with the fact that Ted had moved to Vancouver and went to move back in with his dad.
Right.
By this time, Pauline is dating a young man named Terry and working part-time at the St. John Telegraph Journal, having decided to be a reporter. She's really feeling good about her life and the trajectory that it's on.
Yeah.
Stan and Sybil had moved to a small village in Nova Scotia where Stan would serve at his final church before he retired. They planned to go back to the West Coast too, eventually, to be closer to their surviving son. Their younger son had died years earlier, tragically having had a seizure in the bathtub and drowned.
Awful. Oh.
Yeah. Like him and his wife had a new baby, and the baby was actually in the bathroom, like in a little bouncy bed or whatever, like next to the bathtub. And he was just taking a bath and like had a seizure and drowned in the tub. And the baby was found in the bathroom with him, like dead in the tub.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Really bad. That was really, really rough on Stan and Sybil. So at that point, Pauline had seen very little of Stan and Sybil for at least a couple years or more since they had moved. And she'd only received like one letter from Stan. In fact, I think at some point in the midst of all that, they actually did move back to Vancouver too. So now Pauline's still in St. John, where they'd been that whole time, right? She's got her boyfriend, they're living together. She's got her job at the newspaper. She's going to school part-time. And Ruth is in Halifax. She's going to school full-time. She's going to be a minister. Ted is in Vancouver with Warren, and he's building his life in Vancouver now. So in February of 1988, Pauline is working at the paper when one afternoon, while she was still at work, her mom called wanting to talk. She told Pauline it was time to tell her the things that she had been keeping from her all these years, the things that she said she would tell Pauline one day when she was older.
And she's going to call her at work to tell her this?
Well, no.
Oh, okay.
She couldn't talk about it on the phone. At the age of 23, Pauline was finally going to get the answers that she thought she would never actually get. She thought her mom was brushing her off and was never going to actually tell her. So Ruth gave her instructions to meet her Friday night at a gas station in Sussex, which was basically like a place, halfway between St. John and Halifax. They like met in the middle. And she told Pauline not to tell anyone that they were meeting.
God, I'm so curious. This is so weird. Okay.
It was dusk when Pauline pulled into the gas station parking lot to meet her mother. She got in Ruth's car and leaned across the center console for a hug. Her mom pulled back with a sad, apologetic shrug and handed Pauline a note and an empty envelope. Ruth put her finger to her lips, hushing Pauline, even though Pauline hadn't said anything, and then pointed at the note. Pauline read the note. It said, "Don't say anything. Take all your jewelry off and put it in the envelope. Don't talk until we get out of the car again. I will explain."
What the hell? I am so creeped out.
Then Ruth drove the short distance to the motel next to the gas station, where she took Pauline into one of the motel rooms. She walked over to the door connecting to the room next door, adjoining rooms, right? Gave it a tap, and Stan came through the doorway. Pauline stared in shock and burst into tears. It had been more than a couple years at this point since she'd seen Stan, and she was hurt that their close father-daughter-like relationship had been neglected once he and Sybil had moved to Nova Scotia and then on to Vancouver. Stan hugged her as she cried and told her he had missed her too. The three of them sat at the little table drinking tea while Stan asked Pauline to tell him about her life, her job, her boyfriend, and the fixer-upper house that they had recently bought. Once the small talk was done, Stan and Ruth began taking turns to tell Pauline the truth about their lives all these years. This is when Pauline found out about the counseling Ruth had been getting from Stan in those early days. They told Pauline it was all the way back then that the two had fallen in love, although they had not acted on those feelings for many, many years. Stan went on to tell Pauline that before he met Ruth, he had spent some months counseling an alcoholic man who had been high up in an organized crime syndicate in Vancouver. This man was trying to dry out, experiencing shame and regret for his life and the people that he'd hurt. He talked about his crimes and looking for absolution or comfort. He never finished his counseling, though. He was killed by the mob after they found out that he'd been talking to a counselor and breaking the code of silence. And then the mob came for Stan. They decided he knew too much. One day after Ruth started working at the church, she and Stan had gone to a meeting together at another church. On their way driving back, a car came out of nowhere and was trying to run them off the road. Stan tried to outrun the car, and the two men in the car following them were determined to keep up. Stan darted down an alley in a residential neighborhood that ended abruptly in a garage, and just as he was turning them around, the car came around the corner and the man in the passenger seat was pointing a gun at Stan and Ruth.
Oh my God.
Stan managed to drive over a curb and a lawn to avoid the other car and get to a busier road, and somehow lost the car and returned to the church office thoroughly shaken. Pauline was shocked to hear the story and, of course, asked if they had called the cops. This is when Stan and Ruth told her that they couldn't call the cops. Through the counseling sessions with the now dead gangster, Stan had learned that there were cops in Vancouver on the take and that calling them would only put them in more danger. Stan said that the incident was either an attempt at a hit or at the very least a warning, and that there was a contract out on both he and Pauline's mom.
Oh my God.
We've been on the run ever since.
Shit.
Pauline didn't understand why her mom was included on the hit list. She was just the church secretary. And that's when she found out that her dad, Warren, was also deeply involved in organized crime. Pauline didn't feel like she knew her dad very well, and so she couldn't accurately judge this new information. And so she decided it was very possible that her dad was involved in organized crime.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth went on to tell Pauline that she also had a hard time believing it at first, but then she started thinking about it and it came to make sense. It explained some of his business associates that seemed shady, the sudden appearance of luxury goods that she thought Warren shouldn't be able to afford, the new car he bought Ruth for her birthday with cash, a new cottage just across the Washington state border, and the strange request he'd made when she was pregnant by Ted. She said that Warren wanted to fly Ruth to Mexico with a private nurse to have Ted born there so Ted would have Mexican citizenship, which would allow Warren to put Mexican businesses in Ted's name, that it would be a great opportunity for Ted later in his life. And then Ruth said, but really, what kind of Mexican businesses was he talking about? Clearly, she was still angry that Warren would have used his unborn child to support some money-making scheme.
No shit.
Okay. Stan and Ruth went on to describe the mafia as not a single entity, but a many tentacled octopus, a collection of interconnected yet sometimes opposing organized crime groups, local, national, and international. Sometimes they had shared interests, other times they were in competition or even at war. The orders to get Stan and Ruth didn't always come from the same group. Sometimes the threat wasn't an attempted hit. There had been attempted kidnappings of Pauline or Ted or other family members. Sometimes they were coming for something that Ruth had, like the time it turned out that Ruth had a list of money laundering businesses and account numbers written on a piece of paper that was sewn into a piece of furniture that was in the house she had shared with Warren before the divorce. Did you just mute yourself? I didn't hear you.
I said, what the fuck?
Oh, I read your lips.
Mm-hmm.
And while the story seemed unbelievable, Pauline trusted her mom and she trusted Stan. And this information did explain so much about her childhood and the last 16 years of their lives.
Right.
She still couldn't fully wrap her mind around it. And she tried to poke holes in it. She asked, how could they know what the mob was planning and who was tipping Stan and Ruth off to these threats?
Mm-hmm.
That's when Stan told Pauline about the first time that he was attacked. He was coming out of the church late one night and a man with a knife jumped him. He was trying to fight this guy off. He already had some, defensive cuts on his hands when another big dude showed up. Apparently, this dude was coming to Stan's rescue. He quickly overpowered the knife-wielding dude, and another man came around the corner of the church and handcuffed and hauled him away. The big guy that helped Stan was the one who told him that it wasn't a random mugging and that guy was after him for the mob.
Jesus.
So this is when Stan first found out about the danger that he was in. And this man was a member of a government agency under military orders tasked with fighting organized crime. This was a small, tight organization that didn't tolerate leaks. The agency was made up of a group of undercover security people who gathered intelligence, provided protection for people under threat, including Pauline's family, and who, when necessary, would fight or even kill as part of a government-sanctioned but secret war on what was seen as the growing domestic threat posed by organized crime.
Wow. This reminds me of that movie from the 80s. I think River Phoenix was in it, called Running on Empty.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the three spent a long time talking about these revelations that evening in the motel room. Pauline found out almost more than she could grasp. And then she asked why she had to take her jewelry off before coming into the motel room, and Stan told her so it could be checked. Checked for what? Listening devices. And then Pauline understood not only was she followed by good guys and bad, but possibly her conversations were monitored, her belongings bugged. Her most intimate moments and conversations recorded. And now some unseen agents were looking for evidence under the stones of her rings and the inner workings of her watch.
Oh my God.
Did they find any? She asked. No, Stan said. You'll get them back in the morning. But there was even more to this revelation from Stan and Ruth. They went on to tell Pauline a tangled web of a whole war happening in the shadows, one that Ruth and Stan had been swept up in through their association with members of the organized crime. Stan in his counseling, Ruth in her marriage, and that Stan had no choice but to do what needed to be done to keep him and his family safe, to keep Ruth and Pauline and Ted safe.
Mm-hmm.
And this meant being in constant contact over the years with the secret government agency that was fighting this war. It included a device, a receiver that he kept in his back pocket that would send him coded messages via Morse code, basically through vibrations that he would then decode to reveal the message. These often were messages of threats, raids, captures, just updating on the state of the threat level at any given time, especially where Stan and Ruth and their families were concerned. Pauline asked about Sybil and what Sybil knew. Stan was now retired, and the two in Vancouver, as they had planned to be, they said that Sybil knew about all this stuff, the running, the security people who protected him. She didn't know that Ruth and Stan were in love.
Yeah.
Ruth and Stan decided it would be too hurtful to tell her. And anyway, Stan didn't live with her anymore. He'd gone inside.
Gone inside where?
Right. Pauline was like, well, what does that mean? It meant that for his safety and for Sybil's, he had gone to live in a remote secret community established and run by the secret government agency to hide people like Stan from the crime syndicates, or the O, as they called them, the organized crime.
Uh-huh.
In fact, there were a handful of these communities across Canada. The one he lived in was in British Columbia. The community included a prison for captured members of the O.
This sounds like a Tom Cruise movie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He told Pauline that he lives with the staff there and helps run it. They call it the Weird World. Over the next 5 or 6 years, Pauline would learn more and more about this whole other weird world that most people didn't know about, that she was connected to, protected by, and all the threats she and her mom and her brother had been under for so many years and continued to be. She would spend weekends with Stan and Ruth when Stan would leave the compound, and they would drive to remote areas, stay in small motels together, and Stan would bring her letters from people inside. She found out that there were many people throughout her life, friends and family, that had been caught up in this war in some way, either compromised and sucked into the O, or snatched up after by the security team and brought to one of the compounds, locked up, often becoming repentant and settling into their new life there in the weird world and wanting to reconnect with her. These were the same letters that she had seen Ruth reading all those years before, when Pauline didn't know what she now knew.
This is so weird.
She learned that oftentimes after people were picked up and brought into the community, they were replaced in the outside world by a lookalike.
What?
They would even go so far as to have plastic surgery or elaborate makeup and shit to look like the person that they were impersonating. And that at some point, her dad, Warren, had been grabbed and he had been replaced with a double. Many people from Ruth and Pauline's past had been replaced with doubles.
Is Ted living with a double?
Yeah.
No, I'm scared.
And now Pauline's scared. She didn't know how to go about regular life anymore. Terry, her boyfriend, he wasn't in the know. She couldn't tell him. And she couldn't help but be ever vigilant to possible threats, as well as trying to spot her security detail that she had never noticed before. There were times over those 5 years that she had doubts, for sure. Like, how could this even be possible? But Ruth, her honest and loving mother, would never lie to her. And Stan was like a dad to Pauline. She couldn't even fathom that he would make up this whole story and then lie to Ruth and Pauline and uproot their lives for decades with this elaborate lie. Pauline couldn't believe that. So it must be true. Eventually, Pauline broke it off with Terry. He was just not getting his shit together, and she couldn't tell him about the real stuff. And then on one of their weekend visits, when Stan left the community to come see Ruth and Pauline, Ruth told her that she had decided that she was going to join Stan inside. It was just a matter of time when things lined up properly for her to be able to go, that she would go live in the weird world with Stan. Pauline was super sad about this. She would miss her mom tremendously. And while they waited for the time to be right, Pauline really struggled with it all and the thought of not seeing her mom anymore, knowing Ruth would likely not get to take the leaves that Stan was able to take, Pauline decided that she too would go inside.
Yeah. So how come Stan doesn't have a double? Oh.
This made Stan and Ruth really happy that Pauline wanted to go inside too. It also meant that Pauline kind of stopped worrying too much about her career or where her life was going. Now she was just like in waiting, just like Ruth, waiting for the all clear for her to abandon the outside world to go inside. She quit her job at the paper. She moved closer to Ruth in Halifax. She worked part-time and did some sewing on the side for money to like keep the lights on. And then she met Kevin. She didn't take it seriously. She knew it couldn't last. At any moment, she might disappear to go inside. But something happened.
Mm-hmm.
She fell in love, and she was still waiting. The green light for her and Ruth to leave for their new life inside kept getting delayed. So one day, Pauline just told Kevin everything.
Uh-oh.
And he believed her, and she was really surprised. She was kind of positive that he would laugh or he would dismiss it, and she was totally prepared for him to end things. But none of that happened. Eventually, he proposed. Stan and Ruth made a visit where they told him everything, and he did an amazing job pretending it was all brand new information. Pauline and Kevin got married. Stan even took a risk to come out and attend and give Pauline away at her wedding. And now there were 3 waiting to go inside. As months dragged on and the 3 of them continued to wait for plots to be foiled and people to be picked up and the time to be right for them to go inside, Pauline figured that she'd just go back to living the life she wanted to live. She got back into reporting. She started working at a local TV station and was well on her way to a TV news career that she could be proud of. At some point during this time, it was determined that it was time to bring Ted in on the secrets. So she and Ruth and Stan traveled to Vancouver, where they told Ted enough of the truth to make him understand what had been going on all this time and the danger that he and his wife were in.
Mm-hmm.
The waiting to go inside continued, and the longer they waited, the less sure Pauline became that any of it was real. Kevin was also having doubts. There were a couple of times that Pauline saw her mom question something that Stan told her that didn't jive with other things he'd already told her. And by this time, Ted was already done with the story and with the weird world. His worry had shifted to Ruth and how she was being manipulated.
Yeah.
Pauline had an endless debate in her head. It had to be real. How could Stan, a minister now living on a small pension, afford to be flying back and forth across the country so frequently, paying for all the motel rooms and cottages that they all often slipped away to and hid out in? And what about the times that he was injured? That time Pauline heard a terrifying fight in the basement at Stan and Sybil's house in Winnipeg. The ruckus outside her own apartment after she moved to Halifax. Ruth had been chased in her car by men with guns while they were still living in Vancouver all those years ago. And so many other things that had happened over the years.
Mm-hmm.
If none of it was real and it was all part of a hoax, Stan couldn't have pulled it off himself. He would have needed help. He would have had to have hired or persuaded people like actors to support his story, stage these fights, stage these chases. How could he have pulled that off? And how could he have afforded all that?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the letters, hundreds of pages of correspondence from people inside that Pauline received, that Ruth received. It couldn't be possible that Stan wrote all of them. All these people, a veritable cast of characters with distinct stories, personalities, and their own style of handwriting. Like, who would have the time for all of that alone? And even if someone did have the time, why? Why would anyone go to such extremes to create and maintain such a crazy story if it wasn't true?
Uh-huh.
Then her and Kevin kind of had a fight one day. His family was coming into town. And just before they were supposed to arrive, Ruth called and said that Stan was coming and they had to go meet him and get out of the house for a while. There was a threat that needed to be dealt with, and she and Kevin should come so that the security detail could keep an eye on all of them in one place and not spread themselves thin. And Kevin was like, my mom and my sister will be here in like an hour. I'm not fucking going.
Right. God, can you imagine how weird this would sound to a significant other? Like, we're having dinner with my mom. We can't go to Weird World right now. Like, this is so fucking weird.
Right?
Yeah.
So Pauline left without him, but she didn't feel good about it. And from then on, things got really strained between all four of them because Kevin became an outsider. Ruth and Stan didn't trust him. And Pauline wondered how long it would be before her mom told her that Kevin had been snatched and replaced with a double. Then the moment came months later when Pauline could no longer pretend that she believed this tale. She was having a meal with them at their hotel while Stan was visiting. Stan said something that, again, didn't add up with something that he had told Ruth before. And as soon as Ruth pointed that out, Stan hung his head, his voice became ragged, and somehow he had shifted the conversation to his son's death, which is what he had done the last time that Pauline had seen Ruth point out a continuity error in Stan's information.
That's very manipulative.
And once again, overcome with compassion for this unimaginable loss of a child, Ruth allowed Stan's sorrow to sweep aside her mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, Pauline saw the pattern. Stan's dead son was the perfect diversion when the conversation got dangerous because Stan knew Ruth couldn't cause him more pain with her misgivings in the face of such grief.
Mm-hmm.
That night, Pauline laid awake in bed next to a sleeping Kevin, and the debate had quieted in her head. Stan, whom she had loved like a father, was her family's betrayer. He had been deceiving them, drawing them into his secret world of madness, and she could not conceive why. Kevin and Pauline took a trip west to visit Ted and his wife. They all talked about Stan and Ruth and the insanity of it all and tried to figure out a way to break Stan's spell over Ruth. They all knew that it wouldn't be easy. Pauline came up with a plan to prove it. She called Ruth and lied, told her that there had been a break-in at her and Kevin's place, and asked her to ask Stan what they should do. And Stan came back saying his intelligence people told him 2 guys broke in. They were part of the O, but the security team got them and they're being dealt with.
Oh.
Of course, Pauline knew this was all a lie. No one had broken into her house. She didn't say anything then.
Mm-hmm.
She waited. And about a week later, Pauline confronted her mom with this proof. And she told Ruth, it's not real. He's crazy or something.
Mm-hmm.
But Ruth wouldn't hear it. She was certain there was a reasonable explanation. They were all still in danger. Everything Stan told them was true. Pauline knew she had to confront Stan directly then. And he also didn't back down. He came up with an evolving response to explain it all away. But Pauline just shook her head, no longer convinced. She was done.
Yeah.
Stan looked at her with sadness. When she went to leave, he hugged her and said, "You'll always be my girl." He was crying. Pauline was crying. It was the end of an era. This was the man who had replaced her father after he shoved Warren out of the picture, even though now she could see that Stan's stories were meant to push Warren out of the picture.
Right. Oh my God.
She saw Stan one more time after that. They had a cordial lunch when he came to town. It was a sad reunion. Stan was in his 70s by then, and Pauline knew that it was the last time that she would ever see him. Over the next few years, Pauline had 2 baby girls. She and Kevin divorced, and Stan died. When Ruth hadn't heard from Stan for a few weeks and was having growing concerns, those concerns became real when she received a letter from Sybil informing her that Stan had died weeks earlier. It was quick. He'd had a stroke. When Pauline asked what Ruth thought about Sybil being the one to inform them about Stan's death, considering he was supposedly not living with her for years, Ruth said Stan had a double who lived with Sybil to keep up appearances and protect her. She said Sybil knew this was a double and was totally cool with it.
Oh no, Ruth. Okay.
Ruth got breast cancer more than once. The second time it metastasized and eventually killed her. During her time as a grandparent and a cancer patient being cared for by Pauline, the two repaired their relationship. But Ruth never stopped believing in Stan's weird world. After Ruth died, Pauline went looking for answers. She needed to heal. And in order to do that, she needed to understand. She tracked down Sybil, who was living in a trailer outside of Vancouver. It was clear that Sybil believed as well. It was also clear that Stan had been living with Sybil the entire time that he claimed to be living on that compound in BC.
Right.
Pauline never did figure out how Stan had been able to afford this double life that he'd been living. That was a mystery that forever remained unsolved. Pauline concluded that there was something psychologically wrong with Stan. What exactly that was, she didn't really know. She had read about folie à deux, and it kind of fit, but not entirely, because one big aspect of folie à deux, or a madness of two, is close proximity, which Stan and Ruth did not have. They had long periods of time where they were not together.
Mm-hmm.
She also came to realize, pathology aside, that Stan was a moral man who could not simply fall in love with another woman and betray his marriage. On some level, he needed a compelling reason to be with Ruth, and consciously or subconsciously, he constructed a wild tale that was the excuse that drew them together and necessitated moving around the country in lockstep, sometimes on the run and hiding together. What better environment could he have designed to encourage intimacy than running for your life together, trusting only each other when danger lurked around every corner and anyone could be a double?
Oh my God.
One day, as Pauline did yet another internet search for answers, she stumbled upon an article in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry that talked about a condition called delusional disorder. It said, quote, "Delusional disorder is an uncommon condition characterized by the presence of one or more non-bizarre delusions and the relative absence of associated psychopathology. The delusions concern experiences that can conceivably occur in real life, generally normal appearance/behavior, and the exclusion of other disorders. Patients are usually unaware of the psychiatric nature of the condition. Onset age is usually middle or late adulthood."
Oh my God.
Pauline found it. Stan's delusion wasn't about disembodied voices. It didn't require him to wear tinfoil caps to fend off signals from space beings. It was non-bizarre, possible, no matter how improbable. A later onset allowed Stan to become established in his life, build his accomplishments and credentials. There was no signs of any other psychological problems. He was high functioning, held responsible positions, could think and reason better than most, and he was respected and involved in the community. This is the stuff that ruled out better known conditions like schizophrenia. She found more. Quote, "Delusional disorder is a mental illness in which the patient presents with delusions but with no accompanying prominent hallucinations, thought disorder, mood disorder, or significant flattening effect. Delusions are a specific symptom of psychosis. Non-bizarre delusions are fixed false beliefs that involve situations that could potentially occur in real life, such as being followed or poisoned. Apart from their delusions, people with delusional disorder may continue to socialize and function in a normal manner, and their behavior does not generally seem odd or bizarre."
Wow.
There isn't a lot of research on this disorder because there just haven't been enough cases to constitute a true study. There's speculation that it can be caused by brain damage, basically either because of dementia, head trauma, epilepsy, or cerebrovascular disease. Some experts include other diagnoses under the umbrella of delusional disorders, such as Capgras syndrome, which is the delusion that a close friend or a relative has been replaced by an imposter.
Oh my God.
Pauline felt a jolt when she read that, thinking of all the family and friends that Stan told them had been grabbed and replaced by doubles.
I have chills.
Once Pauline got here to this diagnosis that seemed to fit so perfectly, she was no longer angry or bitter about what Stan had done to her mother, to her brother, and to her and their lives. She was sad. She wished it had been different. And she did what she could to reestablish a relationship with her own dad before he died. A man that she had been kept from and then told was dangerous, then an unrepentant prisoner in the weird world. The man she interacted with after that at her brother's wedding, nothing but a double, a convincing replacement, but not her dad.
Oh my God.
She realized that she, like Ruth, had been the frog in the pot. The water warmed slowly, so it was believable until it wasn't. Pauline has gone on to have a successful career working for the CBC as a reporter, and she also writes. She wrote this whole thing as a memoir. She shared her story, Ruth's story, Stan's story of the weird world with the whole world.
Mm-hmm. That was spooky. I don't like it. Okay, I have so many questions.
I get you guys. I know we're like an hour and 40 minutes in. I just spent a lot of time, and I gave you literally the TLDR. There are so many more details. There's so her book is called Run, Hide. It'll be in the show notes. It is crazy pants.
Okay,
so much more detail that I did not put in this story.
Oh, I'm having a hard time understanding the mental health aspect mixed with the very thoughtful, intentional manipulation that you have to be doing to get other people to sign off on what you're saying.
Well, like how much of it did he actually believe?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so spooky. But then other people are believing it. Oh my gosh. Ooh, I just got chills. Sister, that was a mamma jamma.
Sister, we did it. 200 episodes.
We did it. 200
Two
episodes.
mamma jamma stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is the longest we've ever recorded, I think.
I think so. My ears are on fire from these headphones. Oh my God.
She's got so much sweat underneath her boobs right now, you guys.
Oh my God. I have sweat in places that I didn't know had sweat glands. It's not cute. I got to get out of here. You're over there putting on a sweatshirt because you're cold. Oh my God. Sister, that was so good.
Thank you. So was yours. I
Thanks,
hope the
sister.
Chaos Kid enjoyed episode 200 as much as I enjoyed recording it.
Samesies. Yeah. Give us reviews and shit.
Do all the things. You guys know where all the things are, right? Write us a review. Give us a star rating. Go find us on the things. You can email us at crimewineandchaos@gmail.com. Join the Patreon. You get an extra episode every month over there on the Patreon. It is $5 a month. And new episodes drop a day early for you guys. So
correct.
Join the club.
Oh, love
Sister,
you.
I love you so much. That was amazing.
So fucking amazing.
It was so
chaotic. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Crime, Wine, and Chaos is produced by 8th Direction Records. Artwork by Joshua M. Davis. Music by Paul Abner. If you would like to support the show, you can visit our Patreon page at crimewineandchaos.com/Patreon. Cheers.
That place was bougie.
Fucking bet.